Hello and welcome back to Crushing Comics, the show where I fall in love with my comic book collection all over again. Let's see what I have in store for today. Let's do this. Oh boy. I've been thinking a lot lately about the apocalyptic weather, right? I always said when we lived in Philadelphia that Philadelphia was relatively immune to natural disaster. There's been some low-grade earthquakes there, but there's no big risk of earthquakes. We got the tail end of hurricanes, but never totally badly, although Hurricane Sandy was bad, but it didn't really hit Philadelphia that bad. The worst we ever really got were blizzards, right? We've had some really big blizzards over the course of my life in Philadelphia. And I kind of like that. I like the lack of apocalypse in Philadelphia, yet like a little part of me always wanted to take part in that kind of a weather. I think because it's like something that we see sensationalized in TV and movies, and unlike a lot of things that we see sensationalized, like, Die Hard, that we're not going to go and do, weather is something that we can all experience and say, like, I lived through that. Like, not that I want to be in a really scary earthquake, but it was thrilling the first time I was in an earthquake in Philadelphia and the first time I was in an earthquake here. I don't have a good sense yet of how apocalyptic or not the weather is in New Zealand, other than, as I've mentioned before, the wind in Wellington is just crazy. It is strong enough to pick my 4-year-old daughter up off of the ground and fly her at points. And so I do appreciate that I came to a little bit of adventurous movie wet weather that just happens every day, right? Like in Philly, you're waiting for one big blizzard a year, but here, it happens all the time. Let's see what we've got. Oh, okay. Good ones. Good X-Men ones. Okay. This is perhaps the most sought-after X-Men hardcover right now, other than their first original Lee and Kirby omnibus. This is XMen Inferno. It's funny because of all X-Men stories, it's certainly not the most significant of all time, nor is it the best. And this hardcover was around for a while. I got it at a totally normal price. It was not like it was a short run of comic books. But due to the demand for things like this, and because perhaps it's a little bit more in demand because it's right before that Jim Lee and Claremont era, more so than like Fall of the Mutants and Mutant Massacre, this one has really escalated in price up to like $200-300, even more. And I cringe when I see people paying that much for it because it's available in other formats, it's available digitally, and it's just this one book. You could have so many other books on your shelf. You could have the complete Sandman, thinking the last episode, if you buy it with discounts on it for way under the price of just getting this one book. And wouldn't you rather have a complete run of Sandman than just Inferno? I don't know. Maybe you're a big X-Men fan. I'm a big X-Men fan. I might rather have Sandman. But let's talk about what Inferno was. So first we have to think about the context of what's happening in these books at the time. So the X-Men are presumed dead. They're not showing up on video anywhere. They are based out of the Australian outback, and it's a team that will feel a little bit unfamiliar to you. It's still anchored by Wolverine, Colossus, and Storm, but it's got other characters like Psylocke, still in her original British body, Havoc, who this was like his one original run as an X-Men, and Dazzler, and also Rogue. So it might feel a little bit unfamiliar to you if you're not really knowledgeable about this period and you're familiar with the period afterwards, which never had Havoc again, or the period preceding, which didn't have Dazzler and Psylocke. And the other thing is that they also have Madeline Pryor. So it's a long and twisted story, but Madeline Pryor was a clone of Jean Grey, but we didn't know that at the time. And she got married to Cyclops in the late 100s of Uncanny X-Men, and they have a baby in X-Men 201. And then Cyclops promptly just leaves his family to star in X-Factor. And that was not a decision that Chris Claremont was necessarily happy with. X-Factor was originally planned to have Dazzler as one of the stars, and at the last moment, Jean Grey got inserted. I've written about this on Crushing Crisis before, and that was not necessarily Claremont's direction. It was the first time, really, that there'd been a perversion of his master plan for X-Men. And so, in a way, Inferno represents a little bit of Chris Claremont course-correcting for the first time. So he has Madeline Pryor actually come back to be living with the X-Men. She engages in this battle that they engage in Fall of the Mutants, and she's presumed dead along with the rest of the X-Men, which of course leaves Cyclops feeling very conflicted on one hand, but also open to be with Jean on the other hand. And so she is in the Outback, but she's experiencing a mental breakdown. I don't know if the scene is in this or if it actually comes just before this. I think it comes just before it, where she just totally loses it. in the Outback. Actually, it is here as a prologue, even though it's from an issue that's before this. Just her, like, totally losing it in the Outback and having a dream that she's this, like, faceless being. I don't know if you can really see that. And ultimately, this demon comes to her in her dream, and it turns out that she's being manipulated by creatures from Limbo, which we hadn't really experienced too much of Limbo other than through magic in her limited series with Storm, which occurs somewhere in the 160s of X-Men. So in addition to this, the other thing that comes out over the story is Mr. Sinister. We had seen some hints and shadowed glimpses of Mr. Sinister in the Mutant Massacre period forward, but this is where he really overtly comes out. And so people think of Inferno just as the like X-Men versus Demons thing, but there's a strong component of the Marauders and Mr. Sinister involved as well, because he is also kind of pulling the strings on Matty Pryor, who we actually learn is a clone here. And so X-Factor comes into it, so yay, they find out that the X-Men are not dead, but boo, they have to fight against this clone of Jean. But it also lets Claremont, along with Louise Simonson, who is on X-Factor's writer, but used to be Claremont's editor, and the point that he was setting all of this stuff up, kind of reconcile the fact that Jean got brought back into X-File, or X-Factor. And, oh, wow, what a panel. Just opened up there. It's gonna be random. Yeah. I am not on the good ship Wolverine Jean Grey. I just don't understand it. I don't think they're meant for each other, but that's a topic for another video. So, additionally, in addition to X-Factor and Uncanny X-Men, there's also New Mutants and a story called Exterminators. Part of this whole demon plot is that they have to, like, assemble a certain amount of babies in New York that they're going to, like, sacrifice, and then it's going to open the portal, and Limbo's going to be here permanently. And although the X-Men and X-Factor are engaged in that, New Mutants is also kind of running underneath with that plot as well. And of course, Magic was a member of New Mutants, and so she has a connection to all of this Limbo stuff. I don't know that I've ever read the New Mutants issues in here. I've definitely read the X-Men and X-Factor issues. So that's this book, and it marries up perfectly on one side to the Inferno prologue here. Marries up directly before it. And then directly after it fits the Claremont Lee first, which eventually we're going to get to. I feel like I talk about it every episode, like, when will I get here? So the other book I pulled out, I have a lot less to say about, and that is X-Men Operation Zero Tolerance. This is from a very different period of X-Men. These are not adjacent at all. This is mostly a collection of Generation X, a little bit of X-Force, and X-Men, the 1991 series, but only one Uncanny X-Men issue. It's the first oversized hardcover at the moment that fits after Onslaught, but there's about a 10-issue gap-ish from the end of Onslaught to this, and so none of that has really been collected in a great way across any of these series. So this was a really strange one to get, like, yay, oversized X-Men, but it doesn't marry up to hardcovers on either side. Also, it's a strange collection because it only collects one Uncanny X-Men issue, but X-Men and Uncanny X-Men were so intertwined at that point that it's strange to leave all of those other Uncanny X-Men issues aside, even though they weren't really part of this plot. So it's just strange. I mean, it's a plot of, you know, Bastion kind of coming to the fore and playing this hated and feared thing again and trying to, you know, take out the mutants, which actually, it had been a little while since we had that kind of thing because there was Onslaught. Before Onslaught was Phalanx Covenant, which was more about, like, assimilating the mutants. Before Phalanx Covenant was Fatal Attractions. So it had been a little while before we had really hit the hated and feared mark. And this came out in 2012. So I'm not really sure why this was prominent in 2012. We hadn't had any Bastion action since Second Coming in 2010, which eventually we'll open and I'll get to talk all about. And 2012, we're in the lead up to Avengers vs. X-Men. So, you know, a lot of people I see on, like, comic book groups, and because this one sometimes pops up for discount or is still relatively available, they'll say, oh, should I buy that one? I'm like, I mean, it's an X-Men story, but it just has that disassociated lump of Generation X in it, and it's not the best of X-Men stories. The only thing it really has going for it is that the only other collection really of it is a very old, very, very old trade paperback, and so that's not really ideal. So, as to whether I'd pick it up, I don't know. Even if you're trying to do the whole complete X-Men shelf thing, until we see some continuity on the shelf of whether there's going to be an oversized hardcover before or after it, it's hard to recommend it right now. But I am happy to have Inferno open again. That means we are one step closer to having the comprehensive X-Men shelf put together behind me here. So here is the official shelving of XMen Inferno, and XMen Zero Tolerance. We'll put them up here for now. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of Crushing Comics. Please be sure to keep tuned in and watch as I fall in love over and over again with an increasingly small amount of wrap books that are left over. Soon we're going to be at total shelf parity, and I don't know what we're going to do then, but we're going to find out. So keep watching, and thank you so much for watching Crushing Comics.